serial killers are white males, usually from low to middle-class backgrounds. These men are usually intelligent, but as students have difficulty focusing. Most experience the traumatic childhood, often having been abused psychologically, physically, or sexually. Typically, they may be raised in unstable families, often with criminal psychiatric, alcoholic histories. Raised in such families, these children tend to spend much time on their own, and as a result, many practice animal cruelty at a young age. Had an alcoholic father who often beat him. John Sr. would frequently insult the child, practically eliminating his self-confidence, which led to later difficulties John Jr. would have with his masculinity. As an adult, John began to want to be killed, eventually burying 29 bodies in a crawl space under his house. As Gacy was both popular as a murderer, his neighbors couldn't believe that John was capable of such atrocities.
Most people who suffer as children grow out and become upstanding decent human beings. But serial killers who suffer as children repeat the same mistakes over the course of their life. They can't integrate these adults. There's a very they find that they're sliding down they simply can't achieve it with any perspective. And so they kill and report what they decide as members
Ted Bundy was born into poverty and never knew his father. He had good grades in school, and he was attentive. At the age of 16, he became a voyeur, obsessed, masturbating. Who would have known that Bundy had become a serial murderer and yet he killed many people?
Many Americans, when they think of a serial killer, will think of a glassy-eyed lunatic, a monster, someone who acts that way, someone who looks that way. And yet the typical serial killer is extraordinarily ordinary. He's a white, middle-aged man who has an insatiable appetite for power, control, and dominance. And he kills not for money or revenge, but because it makes him feel good, because he enjoys it, because he has fun with it. He likes the thrill, the excitement, the exhilaration that he gets from squeezing the last gasp of breath from his dying victim's body. He enjoys the suffering on the part of the victim. He tries to make it startle and painful. It makes him feel superior to the extent that he makes his victim insane. Gacy maintained a society of family, maintained a business, a family, and several children, and that facade was sufficient to cover his cracks for many years. He enjoyed mixing up the colors of the elements of the clothes eventually his life left him, his business started failing, and unfortunately Gacy was caught, arrested, convicted, and after, again, 3 appeals in his case, Gacy was executed. With 5% of the world's population, the United States produces more serial killers than the rest of the world, 76%. Europe produces the second most serial killers, 17%. England leads European countries, 28%, followed by Germany at 27%. California has the highest number of serial homicide cases in the United States, while New York, Texas, Illinois follow closely behind.
Maine has the lowest number of serial homicide cases in the United States, and statistics reveal that 65% of serial killer victims are women. A lady killer with a bloodlust and a temper out of control. In his 42 years, Bundy killed approximately 36 young women. No one really knows exactly how many he killed. Although once a police officer asked Bundy in shock how one person could kill 36 women, Bundy shook his head and said, "Add one digit to that, and it didn't."
There are at most about 200 victims of serial killers a year. And that number, although very large, pales by comparison to almost 18,000 single victim murders in the United States on a yearly basis. The problem in this country is not serial murder, it's domestic violence, it's workplace homicide, it's two guys going into a bar, one takes out a gun and shoots the other. The problem, on the other hand, is that serial murders amass a large body count. We are talking about a very small number of guys who do a lot of damage. You know, they may kill 5 or 10 or even 20 or more. Some of them have killed hundreds. That is enough to terrify most of the people in the country.
A cannibal is a person who eats human flesh. There is much discussion as to whether cannibalism is an inherent characteristic of human beings. Living cannibalism stems only from the minds of many cases, such as some of the most prolific serial killers.
Cannibalism is the ultimate form of aggression. There are tribes around the world who have incorporated cannibalism into warfare. So they achieve an ultimate victory not only by killing their enemy, but also by devouring his remains. Serial killers, like Andrei Chikatilo, have also incorporated sadism into their warfare. They have, in the most sadistic possible way, cannibalized their victims by eating their hearts, or their eyes, or their genitalia, in an effort to achieve ultimate pain and suffering on the victim. It's a sadistic impulse that feeds the frail and fragile ego of the serial killer who desires so much, so desperately to achieve a sense of power over other human beings. Cannibalism is the means whereby that happens.
Anthropological evidence seems to suggest that cannibalism was a kind of activity that our pre-human ancestors indulged in a certain popularity. So I think that there probably is some impulse towards that kind of activity. And one of the things that you see with serial killers, I believe, is that they kind of act out very, very archaic primitive impulses that clearly still exist at some very, very deep level.
Cannibalism is psychotic types that they're consuming their victim to keep them and have them always. Any serial killer doing so as the last resort, out of desperation. Certainly, when it's sadism or affection, any serial killer has broken one of the most pervasive and profound taboos in all of society. Psychologically, this means that the killer achieved just the opposite of what he had hoped. He may get the temporary rush, he may feel temporarily high, but in terms of his ego, in terms of self-image, he has got to feel worse about himself than he had before. On the other hand, once he has cannibalized, anything goes.
As cannibalism may have stemmed from the days of our primitive ancestors, modern-day crime labels a few of time's most prolific serial killers as cannibals. In 1968, the Silver Screen immortalized Fletcher films seemed a mere footnote to the madness and turbulence that played out in real life during the most murderous decade, the 60s.
Also Vietnam.
6 years later, Chainsaws, Cannibal Family Values were brought to the screen, and Toby Hooper's surreal cult thriller, Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
There's a sense in which these are our versions of what scholars call learning tales. These are stories that fill us with a sense of marvelous and deliciously terrifying. People love to hear stories like that. And, these kinds of Hollywood are our versions of those tales of wonder and terror and adventure and so on and so forth. And, the confrontation with these mythic monsters that have always populated these kinds of stories.
It is so extraordinary, so terrible, so hideous, that it might as well be fiction. Most people don't see much of a difference between Hannibal Lecter, who was actually a figment of Thomas Harris's imagination, Silence of the Lambs, and Jeffrey Dahmer, who was a real-life, flesh-and-blood serial murderer. To the average person, there is no difference between fact and fantasy. The more extraordinary, the more hideous, the more we fictionalize these people so that they can become entertaining, so that they're fun. After all, muggings are not at all entertaining for most people because they happen too often to anybody. But serial murder, that seems out of the question. Hannibal the Cannibal Lecter, captured the imagination of the nation. The Silence of the Lambs, a novel by Thomas Harris, was adapted for the screen in 1991, in which Lecter played doctor to millions of riveting victims, perhaps cinema's guiltiest pleasure since Norman Bates. The figure of Hannibal Lecter, as he's portrayed on the screen, is not really an accurate portrayal of a serial killer. First of all, I know of no serial killer that was ever psychologist. I know of some medical doctors, but not in the fact that he's one of the worst doctors ever. I know of no person of his caliber, high up in society, that was a cannibal or who was so well integrated into the upper levels of society and yet at the same time something diabolically deranged individual. And of course what Harris did here is just combine the organized and disorganized personalities into one mixed bag, which really doesn't exist.
The kind of wonderful thing that I think this reading of Hannibal is that the serial killer is a kind of to some degree a bit of a Nietzschean Superman, that he's more clever, more intelligent, more cagey than million people except for one person to capture him. And even in the case of Hannibal, there's a certain elegance about it, although in some ways it makes it more terrifying. But it is part of the myth of the serial killer, at least as it's now being elaborated, that the serial killer is bigger than life.
There's something weirdly asexual about Hannibal Lecter. His motivations don't seem to be sexual at all. His desire to kill and devour other people. That's a very, very interesting aspect of his character. He always seems to be above that. It's another thing that makes him seem not quite human, really larger than life in some way. It doesn't seem to be the mercy of his perverse sexual use. Somebody like Dahmer or any of these people, they really, really are.
Long before Hannibal Lecter, fictional cannibal, there was a man the tabloids labeled both the Gray Man and the werewolf of history. He was a true life, living monster. Born into a respectable family in Washington, D.C. in 1870, Albert Fish's immediate family had a history of mental illness and alcoholism. Few of his relatives had perished in mental institutions. At the age of 5, Fish's father died. His mother was forced to work and was unable to care for him. So Fish was sent to an orphanage. Here, Fish recalls, saw some of the boys whipped and took root in my head. Fish became a painter and inventor. Eventually married for 20 years and fathered 6 children. But when his wife left his son alone, leaving Fish to raise the children alone, he began to dangerously unravel. His madness fueled by a growing interest in cannibalism and religion. Fish began to indulge in raw meat at home, often serving it to his children, who would later testify he would do this on nights when the moon was full. He said he never physically abused his children. He did encourage them and their friends to hang his butts, a self-made pattern, studied with inspired brilliance.
It was a period of his life where he went off to Europe and apparently spent a lot of time in his male brothel. I think he was probably male prostitute himself, and indulged in lesbianism, sadomasochistic, homosexual stuff.
In New York City on May 28, 1928, 58-year-old Albert Fish responded to a man placed in the New York World Classified as an 18-year-old boy. The young boy was seeking employment. Fish, housekeeper, a deeply religious man, and fellow sex, paid a visit to the young family at 406 West 15th Street, under the pretense of hiring them to work on his farming store. On the day Fish appeared at the Bud residence for the first time, he stood bearing strawberries and hot cheese from a German jungle. He appeared to be a kind, gracious man, white-haired, slightly feeble, even genteel.
Fish was regarded by many aficionados and friends as scariest in this range of all American Singapore. Partly I think it's because he was seen trying to direct. He was very impossible to look at that. He was but he was an incredibly demented child, murderer, torturer. He spent really his whole life trying to handle him.
Fish could have easily repent for somebody's wrong. This was not his kind. Edward's father was thrilled at the prospect of someone employment at the Royal Canada, and Fish quickly earned the trust of Albert to do his work. Once Fish laid eyes on 12-year-old Jack's blood, he had a diabolical change of his beautiful heart. Enchanted by the small group, Fish quickly switched gears, promised every day, and returned in a few days to bring him to the farmhouse. Fish then insisted on taking Grace along to his niece's birthday party. The gods were lucky at first. Finally decided to allow Grace to go along much. They would never see her daughter. In 1903, Grace's public induction was still undecided. Over time, Fish developed an obsession with writing obscene letters to widows, responding to advertisements of both personal and government agencies. And he wasn't your average gentleman. Fish wasn't interested in dinner party. He asked the women if they would like to beat him, join him in whipping small boys. Fish underwent psychiatric evaluations off and on. Doctors later diagnosed Fish's having an abnormal psychopathic personality. But he wasn't considered insane. It would be 4 more years before the whereabouts of Grace's blood would be discovered. The case was resolved because of one last haunting letter scribed by Fish. But this letter was not intended for a widower. It was sent to Albert and Delia Budd, who knew a loneliness of a much darker strain. The letter read,
My dear Mrs. Budd, I call on you at 406 West 15th Street. Brought you pot cheese, strawberries, wine. Grace sat in my lap and kissed me. Made up my mind to eat her. For dinner to take her to a party. You said yes, she could go. I took her to an empty house in Westchester I had already picked up. When we got there, I told her to remain outside. She picked wildflowers. I went upstairs and stripped all my clothes off. I knew if I did not, I would get her blood on me. When all was ready, I went to the window and called her. Then I hid in the closet until she was removed. When she saw me all naked, she began to cry and tried to run downstairs. I grabbed her and she said she would tell her mama. First I stripped her naked,
he'd left behind in the closet, Fish would carry a portion of flesh by train to his house in the city, where he stewed the flesh with onions and carrots, deriving sexual pleasure as he consumed her. Fish's letter from hell was unsigned, but police were able to discern the letter's distinctive stationery. At the time, Fish was living in a rooming house. Police tracked him down and arrested him. Among the materials found in his possession were old newspaper clippings about Fritz Harman, the German vampire who killed young men before selling their flesh in the marketplace. An outraged policeman asked Fish about his cannibalization of Grace Budd. "It occurred to me," Fish replied.
Fish's story and Fish himself seemed to be like the flesh and blood incarnation of all of these kinds of fairy tale monsters that you are so fascinated and terrified and titillated by when you're a child. Again,